In order to manifest your dream life, rather than a life of frustration caused by ignorance-based conditioning in mind, we cultivate the ability to not be swayed by this world. Not be swayed by this world, as stated in Romans 12:2. It says, "Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Renewing of your mind. So if you listen attentively to this video and apply what we're discussing here, you will dissolve conformity to this world. And as a result of dissolving conformity to this world, you'll go on to naturally manifest your dream life. You will live the way you truly desire to live. You will really think for yourself. Now, this is not something that I was taught in school for whatever the reason may be. I learned this in 2004 through a book called Think and Grow Rich. He said, in the subconscious mind, there is this conditioning or programming that was placed in there for whatever the reason may be, unknowingly by the individual. If the individual identifies with this programming or this conditioning in mind, that is not based on who they really are. The conditioning in mind causes the individual to become identified with particular appearances in this world and cause them to do things that they don't genuinely desire to do. So, in other words, they're watching the news, they're on social media, they're reading some information, and there's some information in there, or the appearances, trigger a particular belief in mind, and the individual becomes reactive to whatever appearance, and they think it's because of the information, because of the news, because of this or that. It has nothing to do with this or that. It is the conditioning in mind that is being triggered unknowingly. Now, the individual might claim, they might say, oh no, I don't identify with this conditioning. But meanwhile, their thoughts, how they emotionally relate, and their behaviors, if they are honest with themselves. If we are honest with ourselves, we'll see that, you know what? Whenever I come across this kind of information or whatever it is, whatever appearance in this world, I begin to act in a way that I don't genuinely desire to act. And that is what Romans 12:2 means when it says, do not conform to the patterns of this world. So the conformity to the patterns of this world, whatever the appearances may be, information, people, environment, circumstance, is the result of conditioning in the subconscious mind. Now, in 2004, when I came across the book Think and Grow Rich, I set out to dissolve this conditioning in mind. Because as he had said in the book, and as I have found as well, as a result of dissolving the conditioning, which does not represent me, the conditioning is not an accurate representative of me. By dissolving the conditioning in mind, that which I desired, the definite chief aim, manifested. The first one was to get out of $50,000 debt by imagining myself having in my possession $25,000. What happened along the way was there was conditioning that was brought to awareness to be released. Conditioning surrounding the relationship with people, relationship with money, that which we can call limiting beliefs were being triggered to be released. Before Think and Grow Rich, I would just identify with this programming. I would conform to the patterns of this world in a way that was not true to how I actually am, which is beyond conformity. So all of this is designed to release the conditioning. Everything we talk about on this channel, what was discussed in Think and Grow Rich, what Romans 12:2 states, is designed to decondition the mind so you could live the way you truly desire to live. Now, you may hear me say sometimes, I recommend being at least neutral to this world before you think or act accordingly. Being at least neutral to this world before you think and act accordingly. Why I say that is, if the individual is triggered by appearances, so in other words, the conditioning in mind is triggered by whatever kind of appearances, and they identify with that condition, they may generate a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, and thus they conform to the patterns of this world. They, in that moment, don't really think for themselves. They don't listen to intuition, which guides the way. You know, Steve Jobs, in his wonderful commencement speech, he said, follow your heart and intuition, everything else is secondary. So when I applied the principles in Think and Grow Rich, the primary principle being dissolve the conditioning to manifest the definite chief aim, not only did I get out of $50,000 debt, what was interesting, very interesting, is that as a result of dissolving this conditioning in the subconscious mind, the ways emerged that were different than I was used to before. They were always there. The way it happened was different than I was used to seeing in my life before, and also ways that I did not see people do. Now, rather than worrying about how it happened or what to do, what not to do, I found that by dissolving the conditioning in mind, not identifying with this programming in mind, essentially Romans 12:2, not conforming to the patterns of the world, and to get even more precise, to split hairs, not identifying with the conditioning in mind that's generating the illusion of being controlled by this world. What happened was the ways emerged, and then I realized upon connecting the dots looking backwards that the conditioning in mind was distorting reality. In other words, the ways were always there. They were always there. And consider this, there are infinite ways. It says in the Bible, God's ways are past finding out. So, as a result of dissolving the conditioning, the way emerged out of the infinite ways. And not only did it emerge, I connected dots looking backwards, and I said, oh, when I was identified with this programming, this conditioning, it was distorting reality because I did not see those ways. I did not see those ways. I have set definite chief aims after that one. Until this day, I have definite chief aims. I moved up in my corporate career, built 3 successful businesses. My first business was my IT business. The second business was my consulting practice. And I did 10 years in corporate prior to my IT business. And then also this YouTube channel here. And I started another one, focused more on entrepreneurship. If you're interested in that, I'll link in the description to it. You name it, relationship areas, personal life areas, business life areas. What happened since I read Think and Grow Rich, and what happens and continues to happen, is as I no longer conform to the patterns of this world, as a result of not identifying with the conditioning in mind, we'll talk about exactly how to do it. What happens is the way, my natural way, my dream life emerges. as all these wonderful things, as stated in the Bible. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. And not only are they added onto you, they're added onto you by grace and grace alone. It just does not appear that way through the conditioning. So we dissolve the conditioning. So, over the years, I found out that it was the conditioning that was distorting reality. And no shame, no condemnation, as you are not the conditioning. You are that which is prior to the conditioning or beyond the conditioning, transcendent to the conditioning. The way we do not conform to the pattern of this world is through awareness. Awareness is the master key, and thus you are, as pure awareness, witnessing in consciousness, here, all these things appearing in consciousness through mind, and as a result of witnessing what is appearing in consciousness through mind, you are also aware of if the conditioning is playing out in relation to this world via thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. If an individual is triggered by conditioning while they're watching the news, while they're having conversations with people, in relation to their tasks, their projects on the entrepreneurial journey, while in relationships, friendships, etc. If the individual is triggered by the appearances, they know based on what kind of thoughts appear in mind. Thoughts that suggest illusions of separation from being that which you desire to be. You are already that which you desire to be. These thoughts that appear in mind that suggest otherwise. For example, in relationships, the genuine desire is to have harmonious relationships in whatever shape or form. Friendships, romantic relationships, business relationships. That is a genuine desire. Why? Because fundamentally, there is no other. So we relate to each other fundamentally beyond this conditioning in perfect harmony. To prove the point, have you noticed that as you no longer identify with this conditioning in mind, the us versus them kind of conditioning in personal life, relationships, business life, people you meet, there is natural love that emanates. And there is not only a natural love that emanates, thoughts, how you emotionally relate, behaviors is one where we could describe it as being in harmony with the person in whatever shape or form. Friendship, romantic relationship, etc. So the individual is aware if they are about to become identified with a condition through reactivity. So no shame, no condemnation for reactivity. It is an opportunity point to dissolve that conditioning. So via thoughts of separation, us versus them. Emotions, emotional turmoil resulting in, let's say, a conditional response to fight the person, argue with the person, try to be right, make them wrong. I personally have no interest anymore in who is right and who is wrong. I am interested in, as a result of dissolving this conditioning, I am interested in harmonious relationships in relation to the vision. That's it. In relation to the definite chief aim, harmonious relationships. In friendships, in romantic life, in personal life, in day-to-day life, in family life. And I don't need to worry about how it happens because I know fundamentally everything is in perfect harmony. By not identifying, you can really think for yourself. Intuition arises, which is beyond the conditional, or we could say instinctual responses that the individual got used to and say, oh, that's just how I am. Meanwhile, they know in their heart that's not how they really are. Because if those thoughts appear in mind, they don't feel right. how they emotionally relate to another individual does not feel right. The behaviors are not natural. So this is where a person may try to put on an act or a persona or fake it or pretend to be someone in order to people please, in order to get a result. And what I have found is that is not necessary. That's just another condition. I need to be this or that in order to be as I am. You could do nothing to be as you are. By that it is meant, drop the conditioning. And what naturally arises is the still small voice. What to do, what not to do, intuition. So there's a wonderful book called Abd Allah, Teacher Healer by Walter C. Lanyon. This book was said to refer to the same Abdullah that was Neville Goddard's teacher. It's called Abd Allah, Teacher Healer by Walter C. Lanyon. Wonderful book. In there, Abd Allah says, "This is a glorious thought and one worth sitting in the silence with. I and my Father are one. You have heard it for years, yet when you ponder it anew, with the thought that from the next thought I'm going to think God's thoughts, it will reveal to you a newness of life and purpose you have never known before." The still small voice, of which so much has been said, will finally become the only voice as you begin to realize your oneness with the Father within. This is really thinking for yourself. This is really thinking for yourself. This is applying what Steve Jobs had said in his commencement speech: follow your heart and intuition, everything else is secondary. Now, intuition is an interesting word. It is beyond the individual conditioning in mind. So all that conditioning that results in conformity to this world is not based on intuition, is not based on the still small voice. Does the Father within identify with illusions of separation? To God, there is no other. It says in the Bible, besides God, there is no other. So how can a person claim to really think for themselves, follow their heart and intuition, if they identify with thoughts that suggest illusions of separation? Doesn't make any sense. They are not really thinking for themselves. So rather than identifying with the instinctual conditioning where the person says, oh, this is just how a human being behaves. Human beings, everything is constantly ascending to higher degrees of manifestation of truth, guided by intuition. Now, I used to listen to the Steve Jobs commencement speech over and over again while I was building my IT business. And I could honestly say what I had discovered as a result of listening to my intuition while I was building my IT business is not only was the conditioning falling away, because it was so obvious to me that that conditioning was conformity to this world, or more specifically, patterns of this world, as a result of identification to conditioning in mind. And they were falling away. They were falling away by not identifying with them. And what was emerging was the things we talk about in entrepreneurship, like the growth of the business in the areas of innovation, sales, marketing, operations, finance, leadership. Also, the emergence of physical assets, digital assets, intangible assets, and relationships that all play a role, a harmonious role, in the business growth. Also, releasing the conditions in relation to the revenue-generating side of the business, the prospecting, the lead generation, the client acquisition, and ongoing business with existing clients. As the conditioning fell away, some of these areas I would focus on, some of these areas people would emerge to focus on. They would become team members, vendors, partners, and also technology would emerge to support me in these areas. Which is why I always say, you are right now standing on your own acres of diamonds, as Russell Conwell put it. It might not appear that way to the individual identified with conditioning that distorts reality. Now you see clearly what I mean by that. Through the distortion of reality, it does not appear to the individual that they have opportunities in front of their face right now, that they have everything they could possibly ever need in front of their face right now. Now, to get deeper into what I was talking about with Acres of Diamonds, I put together 2 videos on my new channel discussing this with a high degree of nuance in relation to entrepreneurship based on personal experience of being a full-time entrepreneur since 2009 and working with thousands of businesses along the way when I got into consulting, and also building my own IT business to success. If you're interested in those conversations, I'll link in the description to those 2 videos. They are on my new channel. Now, speaking of intuition, William Walker Atkinson said this in his wonderful book. I absolutely love this book. The book is called The Inner Consciousness, a course of lessons on the inner planes of the mind, intuition, instinct, automatic mentation, and other wonderful phases of mental phenomena. He says, in the region of the higher planes of the inner consciousness are to be found that wonderful aspect or phase of mind which we call intuition, which Webster defines as direct apprehension or cognition, immediate knowledge, as in perception or consciousness involving no reasoning process. Intuition is a most difficult thing to describe, but yet nearly everyone understands what is meant by the term. It is a higher form of that which we know as instinct. So this is a key distinction. The individual, or the human being, as a result of programming in their mind, considers their behaviors to be instinctual, and no shame, no condemnation. It's not to suggest that many of these instinctual behaviors are not beneficial anymore. Some of them are no longer relevant. For example, we live in a wonderful world right now where you could flip over to whatever social media network or school community. I have access. I created one. If you're interested in that, I'll link in the description to it, or any kind of online community. Or you can go to a local meetup and you can walk up to someone and start a conversation with them, and they'll reciprocate the conversation. They'll flow with you. You'll engage in a conversation with someone and there's no immediate threat. Now, based on particular conditioning in mind, the person may still think particular kind of instinctual conditioning is still relevant, and so they are afraid to start conversations with people. They're afraid to do the prospecting, the lead generation, the client acquisition. They're afraid to start a business. That's okay, no shame, no condemnation. That's where intuition comes in, to dissolve the conditioning, because we know that those instinctual patterns or those conditions, the instinctual ones, are no longer relevant in this regard. So he says, it is a higher form of that which we know as instinct. The difference being chiefly that instinct belongs to the phenomena of the below conscious planes and has to do chiefly with that which concerns the physical body and well-being, while intuition belongs to the above conscious planes and has to do with the higher part of the nature of the individual. Instinct sends its messages up to the intellect, while intuition sends its messages down to the intellect. So that's where we can translate it into a conversation or a voice or an art form, whatever kind of art form, dance, painting, conversation. That's where we get articulation from. You can articulate intuition, just like how you can articulate into what we can say are beliefs, which we describe it intellectually as a way of categorizing or making sense of instinctual patterns. So again, he says, instinct sends its messages up to the intellect, while intuition sends its messages down to the intellect. Many of the highest forms of pleasurable things come from the region of intuition. Art, music, poetry, and the love of the beautiful and the good. The higher forms of love, intuitive perception of truth, all these come from above, from the region of intuition. So again, we'll relate this over to the still small voice, intuition. What I have found, to really think for yourself, it is key to know the difference. Wisdom is knowing the difference, as the saying goes, between the conditioning in mind and intuition. With intuition, you do the thing that transcends the patterns of this world, practically speaking. By that it is meant ways that have not been done before, for example, in entrepreneurship, to generate more clients. Or maybe ways that have been done before, but just you did not access that information that was always there via intuition because the individual was identified with this conditioning. So we know if it's conditioning based on reactivity. And as I had mentioned earlier, I recommend being at least neutral to this world in times of reactivity, which simply means be still, from which you can really think for yourself, from which you can listen to your heart and intuition easier. Now, there's a wonderful book called Power of Kabbalah by Yuda Berg. In there, they simplify. This is how we dissolve the conditioning. They call it the transformation formula. So an obstacle appears or occurs, but it's not an obstacle. It's just a condition in mind that suggests that the appearance is an obstacle. Because to another individual, they might not see it as an obstacle. They might see it as an opportunity, or they might see it as a clear pathway forward. For example, starting conversations with a person. An individual who's not identified with that conditioning intuitively feels like starting the conversation. They walk over or they send the DM, start the conversation. Conversation flows. They don't see it as an obstacle to get to know the person. They don't look around. Let's say starting a conversation, you go to a networking event or something like that. You don't look around to see what other people are doing, if they're looking at you, how they're behaving in a way, this is key, in a way that suggests that you need their approval or validation to be that which you desire to be before, and only if in accordance to judging by appearances, which is based on conditioning, you say, oh, because they look this way, that way, or they're not looking at you as you're going to go talk to this person, now it is safe to do it. That's clearly based on conditioning. So that is a result of the conditioning. It's generating this act of the person looking around, emotional turmoil, thoughts of disharmony, etc. So without that conditioning, they walk over and start the conversation, intuition. With the conditioning, they say, oh no, instinctively, this is how human beings are. They scan the environment. Well, the answer is it depends. In this context, is there an actual threat? So we see clearly that it's an illusory obstacle based on conditioning. The person may think that the people are the obstacle. So number two, realize that it is the reaction, not the obstacle, that is generating the illusory enemy. So there is no obstacle. Being neutral to people in the room. That's what I meant by being at least neutral. Now, why I say at least neutral? Because you can also still be happy, joyous, ecstatic, happiness, loving, whatever way you describe it. You don't have to force yourself to be neutral. I say be at least neutral so that you can access that clarity from which you can really think for yourself, the still small voice, intuition, or also access the flow so you naturally do or not do, say or not say, whatever's related to how you truly are or your vision. So they say, if there's about to be reactivity, we shut down the reactive system to allow the light in. And then you naturally express your proactive nature. What this means is that the conditioning in mind is throttling the flow, restricting the flow of the light of pure awareness, which is that consciousness bliss, or consciousness happiness, consciousness peace, consciousness joy, which manifests in form. It actually takes form. You know how I say, you are completely fulfilled. You are love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. I don't say you are love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment to convince you. You inevitably realize that as you dissolve the conditioning, that the love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment that you are seeking for, you are already that. And then you don't scan the environment. You don't go looking for approval or validation before you do the thing you genuinely desire to do. You just do the thing or not do the thing. And it could look like a mix and match. For example, let's take the networking event. You flow in there. You're not identified with the appearances of this world. You're feeling joyful, happiness, blissful. You flow in there, and people relate accordingly with you as a dance, as a theater. How so? Sometimes you see someone you want to talk to, you walk over, start a conversation with them. People walk over and start a conversation with you. It's not like you're saying, I'd rather them start a conversation with me, or I'd rather go over there and start the conversation. Those kinds of preferences can be based on conditioning, as in it's better if it's this way, it's better if it's that way. I don't worry about those details anymore. Everything flows naturally, effortlessly, and that is a result of dissolving the conditioning. Now, the power of Kabbalah, they gave this way to dissolve the conditioning. There are infinite ways of dissolving the conditioning. You just do whatever works, or don't do whatever does not work. One of the ways that was discussed in Think and Grow Rich was auto-suggestion. As you suggest that you are that which you desire to be, you dissolve the conditioning that suggests that you're not that which you desire to be. As a person also does not use auto-suggestion and does not react, what naturally emerges is the way that they genuinely desire to be, even if they don't know how. So the same thing happens. In auto-suggestion, you accept that you are that which you desire to be, and the conditioning that suggests you are not that which you desire to be dissolves. Through non-reactivity, or returning back to that neutral state through dropping the conditions by not reacting, or as I say sometimes, you can do nothing to know that you are that beyond all these appearances. It means do not identify. Emotions are released, thoughts are no longer identified with, body relaxes, and the natural way emerges. Your dream life emerges. Because that frustration, as I mentioned earlier, is caused by ignorance-based conditioning. That is what's resulting in the conformity to the patterns of this world. So the example of walking into the networking meeting or party or whatever, you're not conforming to the patterns of this world. You're not suggesting that, oh, look, these people, they won't accept me the way that I am. That conditioning is not there. You dissolve it. Through applying this over the years and being in various scenarios, personal life, business life, relationship life, networking events, business meetings, travels, etc. Whenever there was an opportunity to dissolve the conditioning, I took the opportunity to dissolve the conditioning. Because I put two and two together. I said, going back to 2004 when I did this with Think and Grow Rich with the first definite chief aim, can it be replicated again and again and again with the next vision, the next vision, the next vision? Absolutely it can. Because maybe there's more conditioning in the mind. I don't go digging for this conditioning if it appears. Another way of saying it is I don't go looking for fights. If the conditioning appears, I dissolve it. And not only are these visions actualized, you materialize these visions, whatever they may be, you also dissolve the conditioning along the way, and the result is more flow, more easefulness, more blissfulness. Your natural way, and as I had mentioned in a recent video, if you haven't seen it, I'll link in the description to it, the real self-confidence, the real self-charisma, the real self-magnetism, which is not based on condition, emerges. And not only does those things emerge, the appearances of real self-confidence, real self-magnetism, real self-charisma, what also emerges is your style of that. Because as mentioned, is there a point to look around and mimic people? in order to get a result because we think we need to do it this other person's way, that's not really thinking for yourself. Intuition guides the way. You know what to do, what not to do, what to say, what not to say. The still small voice reveals it beyond the mental chatter. So by taking these opportunities to dissolve the conditioning, you'll find it's easier to be at least neutral to the appearances. If you're about to react or thoughts are about to appear in mind in relation to an appearance, emotional reactivity, you're sensing it's about to happen, or physical discomfort in the body, you'll naturally return back to being neutral, and you'll be able to really think for yourself. Intuitively, you'll know what to do. You'll know how to relate to the appearance in whatever shape or form. And if, let's say, it was a situation where it's time for you to leave, you'll leave. If it is a situation where it's time for you to stay and have that conversation or do whatever, you will. So this also helps with entrepreneurs might say sometimes, when is it good to walk away from a deal? When is it good to not walk away from a deal? Well, I say the answer is it depends. When you walk away from a deal, it doesn't mean that you won't succeed in business. It means that you don't identify with that appearance and say, it has to be this deal. I have seen many times that when a deal didn't go through, later on they come back and they want to do the deal with you. Or when the deal didn't go through, there was space in my calendar and someone reached out, a lead was generated, or I reached out to someone and they give me an opportunity that now fits perfectly in that time available in my calendar slot. If I had to force myself to do this deal when it does not feel right, because of scarcity-based or lack-based conditioning in mind, then I would have just created unnecessary suffering and frustration. I choose to do the deals which are intuition-based, which feel right, and I found that has never been known to fail me. Only at times where I committed to things where in my heart I knew that was not the thing to commit to, did what manifest after that was the reflection of identification to that conditioning or the conformity-based appearances. Essentially, one way of saying it is, I created a prison and walked right into it. And I didn't realize that unknowingly. And then afterwards, I was like, wait, there was a little sense there that I was walking into something that doesn't feel right. That was a condition about to play out as theater, and I identified with it, and then the theater played out. So awareness is key, the master key. So in recap, awareness is the master key, and you are that pure awareness, and you can experience the light of pure awareness, which is the consciousness bliss through non-reactivity, through being still in the moment and allowing clarity to emerge. You know what to do, what not to do, what to say, what not to say. And all of this happens naturally in flow. That's why I always say, make flow a priority. So everything that I talk about here happens a lot easier and effortless in flow. The harmony between the sympathetic, parasympathetic system, reconciliation of divergent and convergent thinking into lateral being, harmonious relationship between physical, emotional, mental, spiritual happens naturally, effortlessly in flow. And the way you access the flow is many ways. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi in his wonderful book said, where challenge meets skill. So rather than running away from the challenge, I step into it by releasing the conditioning along the way. So an example would be, let's say if you did a cold plunge or a cold shower or something like that, and you haven't done it in a while, or maybe it's your first time doing it. You step into the shower, and there could be a tendency to want to step out of it. An instinctual response, let's say, to step out of it because it's cold. But meanwhile, consciously, you know, provided that you know, it's not harmful for you. It's actually beneficial for you because there's all kinds of benefits you'll get from it, including dopamine release and whatever else. Prior to stepping into it, you may say something like, this is actually good for me. This is actually great for me. And then you'll find that there's less reactivity. And even during, if you don't identify with the thoughts of this is hard, this is stressful, why am I doing this? And you just relax into it, you'll actually find that emotions, body, thoughts, etc., all harmonize. And not only that, you get the benefits from it. The physiological benefits, the neurological benefits, the emotional benefits, the psychological benefits, everything, the works. So that's one way to access the flow. Another way to access the flow is going for a walk in nature, meditation, doing what you love to do, art. That's another way of accessing the flow. Another way to access the flow is by dissolving the conditions, because as you dissolve the conditions, what happens is the natural way of being is flow. All of this is designed to return you to the source, or another way of saying it is, all this is designed to do is dissolve the illusions of separation from the source being, knowing that you are that complete love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, not just in theory, in experiences, in flow, where it manifests as ideal life, harmonious relationships, friendships, etc. So I trust you found this video to be helpful. Let's conclude this with an auto-suggestion to further encourage. You can say, I realize that I am that beyond conformity to this world, knowing that I am that beyond all these things, transcendent to all these things. What naturally shines forth is the real self as all these things in perfect harmony. Clear thinking, and naturally listening to my heart and intuition, effortlessly and spontaneously. If you'd like a copy of this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk with you soon. Take care.